So our guest panelist tonight, Jeremiah Markway from Markway Ranch.
As Logan said, I'm from Missouri, central Missouri. We're about 20 minutes south of Jefferson City, so pretty much on the edge of the Ozarks. And we're in fescue country. We we raise hair sheep and Corriente cows and some Corriente crosses, some South Pole cows, and then we have a custom grazing enterprise that we kind of do in conjunction um, with the hair sheep. So it's a grazing operation. So there's no farming involved in it. There's not much cropland around here, and we just don't have any cropping equipment or any haying equipment. Any hay that we use, we end up buying, but we strive to graze year round. And generally, well, we do that with the sheep every year, and generally we do that with our cows, our mama cows as well. But I guess Dad put up his first high tensile electric fence back when I was 10 years old, so a little over 40 years ago. And I guess I've just kind of grown up with it. It's always intrigued me, and I guess I really didn't know any other way. And it just continues to intrigue me, and there's always more to learn. And, I've never stopped trying to do things better. So,
we're going to start with perimeter fencing. So Jeremiah, you're running several different types of cattle, running sheep. What kind of, or how important, I guess, is a good permanent perimeter fence?
oh, I think it's pretty key to a good operation and being able to sleep at night. And especially the older I get, it's become more important. When I was younger and stuff, I didn't worry about it as much, but um, kind of tried to get by and everything. But the older I get, the more I want to invest in even better fencing all the time on the perimeter because I don't like neighbor conflicts and things like that. And I think it's really important to have really good infrastructure, particularly perimeter fencing.
Yes, absolutely. So, between starting, with your dad and even to you, is the high tensile fence predominantly what you put up, or have you kind of done a little bit of everything through the years?
We've done a little bit of everything, and so we run on both owned ground that my family owns, and then quite most of ours is on rented ground. So we kind of run the gamut. We have everything from three strand high tensile fence to five strand barbed wire where there's just cattle to when we add sheep to those cow pastures and stuff, we'll add either one or two barbed wire strands to that fence, or an electric offset on the inside. And then we also have a little bit of ground that has some woven wire around it in places and things like that. Um, I guess like I said, the older I get, if I had to do it all over again, and of course, when you're young, you don't have the money to do it, but I kind of highly encourage people to consider putting in net wire fence on their perimeter because it just solves so many problems. And whether you're going to have sheep or not, just for calves and uh, and everything else, it just opens up a lot of opportunities there.
Yes, absolutely. Because I know on our farms that our perimeter fences we've been putting up, we've been doing 6 to 7 high tensile wires, up to 60 inches tall. But the bottom wires are fairly close together for sheep or just we wanted to build it knowing that we can put literally whatever we wanted in it, and there will be no
Exactly.
fencing restrictions with what we're putting up. And in our high traffic areas as far as roadways, we're doing the woven wire fence or
Yeah,
the metal netting just in case if the electricity went out and we lost power or something goofy was happened, nothing's getting on the highway. Uh,
right.
so
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
without a
And
doubt. So very good. So a question I get a lot or see a lot of ask on forums or whatnot is, and you hit it a little bit, but if you could go a little more in depth, is existing cattle fence and turning sheep onto that. So
mhm,
you talked about adding additional barbed wire or an offset electric.
mhm.
What kind of spacings are you kind of dealing with? Which one of those works best or is maybe the most cost effective?
I think it depends a lot on your situation. Today we ended up putting two strands of gaucho on an existing 5 wire fence, and that was because, for one, the neighbor that we were against there, he keeps his pasture really short, and we're going to be putting sheep against him. Sheep naturally always want to go to the short grass, especially this time of year. And he's a good friend of ours, and I don't want any hard feelings there and stuff. Bottom strand on, so it's now a 7 strand barbed wire fence. The bottom strand's about 8 inches off the ground. The next two are about 4 to 5 inches spacing above that, and then from there on up, it's more like space towards a cattle fence. But
Mhm.
um, I don't know. There's that most of the time. I really kind of like to do the one strand of offset electric about 12 inches from the fence and about 12 inches off the ground. And the only reason I don't do that everywhere is because, if I'm going to be fighting a lot of brush, where I have to keep it mowed or something or sprayed. That's, I don't like to have to fight that. And then I run into an issue of having lots of different fencers to all the different places that we run on and stuff. So sometimes it's just easier to put up the barbed wire. Now, on our interior fences that are barbed wire, um, I may have to move the bottom strand of the current 5 wire fence, but then I might just add one strand of barbed wire there. And because I don't want them going through that fence, but should they do it, it's not as big a deal as if they get out, on the neighbor. And we've got good neighbors. We get stuff get out once in a while, and they call and laugh about it and say, hey, your sheep are free grazing or whatever. So it's not like it's that big a deal, but I think I hate it worse than they do. So
For sure, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. From on some of the stuff I've messed with a little bit on sheep specifically, or not necessarily sheep, but just wire height is much of anything electric over or under 12, 10 to 12 inches is kind of pointless a little bit because a lot of times that fescue is way over that anyway,
right,
if it gets growing too much. But so yeah,
right.
that makes a lot of sense being at that 12 by 12 type of deal. So, one thing I guess we ought to talk about somewhat before we move on to temporary fencing is the quality of products we're purchasing. And this goes both ways, no matter what fencing you're messing with. How important is it to buy stuff that's going to last or be user friendly?
Yeah, are you asking me that?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, anybody can answer it, but you can
Yeah.
start with it. Yeah.
Oh, I think it's a deal. If it's a deal breaker, I think that's why a lot of people get turned off to managed grazing, is because they start with the cheap stuff that doesn't work right or doesn't hold up, and then they say, "Well, this stuff's a joke." This whole thing's a joke. So I think paying a little bit more, the old thing of buy once, cry once deal is
Mhm.
definitely worth thinking about when you're getting started with managed grazing and all of the stuff that you're going to use, whether it's wire or step in post or good charger or HDPE line or whatever you want to talk about. It's buy the best you can.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. I was spoiled. I started out kind of with the best, if you will, and when I started just from the farm I was working on, and then when I started out on my own, I'm like, I wonder if I could skip by, and I quickly realized that it's just not worth it. It's just not
Right.
worth it. So yes, and that goes from insulators to polywire to reels to post, anything like this.
Yeah.
Buy once, cry once. That's very well put. Yeah. Yeah, so Ed Dubrick had a little bit of issue signing in. He had a question again, Jeremiah. If you could repeat the wire spacing you're doing for your sheep paddocks to keep
Um,
lambs in.
on the barbed wire or on the electric or what?
Well, hey, okay. He's asking about actually temporary sheep paddocks.
Oh, okay. Um, so that usually I just use 2 strands of polywire on the temporary, and I usually use I think it depends on how tall the grass is there again, like you were talking about. Once later on the fescue gets a little taller, I use like the fourth clip on the O'Brien's post from the bottom.
Yep.
But when it's earlier in the year and it's shorter, I use the third clip from the bottom. And then on the top wire, it's either the sixth or the seventh clip, depending on, you know, that. So
Yep.
that's on a temporary.
Hmm.
As far as like our three strands of high tensile, when we do that, we do more of like a 12, 22, 32, or something like that, just whatever you think looks good. But like you said, Logan, I don't like to get it too close to the ground because it just ends up grounding out and whatnot. So,
Yeah, even though it's kind of a double-edged sword because sheep always like to go under
yeah,
fences versus over, but
right,
there's a happy medium in there for sure.
right.
So on this lanes deal, we have a little bit of several different answers. Some say it's necessary if there's not a lot of good water sources. Um, some hate them but can't figure anything else out. Elton says no lanes. So what do you have thinking? What's your thoughts?
Um, I'll say, I'm not going to say lanes are bad, but I'll say I don't like permanent lanes that get rutted up and get continual use all the time. So, like most of our water that is portable, um, we will move that around, whether it's a quick coupler coming out of the ground, riser and quick coupler coming out of the ground. I may have a tank right there, but I also may have a fairly good length of uh, HDPE poly pipe that I'll drag around and move that tank, so that I'm not mudding up one spot in the field. If I have to use a lane, I'll change where the lane goes. So with the temporary fencing, it might be in one spot going to a water tank or whatever, a permanent water tank or a pond or something like that, and then I'll move it the next time I'm in that pasture or paddock. I'll move it to a different spot so that I'm not beating it out and making. I just hate to see erosion starting and stuff, and that's what I ended up seeing with the lanes that were permanent. So.
Moving on to some temporary fencing here. If you see this picture, Jeremiah, can you explain this to us a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, and this is not like set in stone, but I had a friend of mine say, "Hey, if you had a half, I guess it was a half a section of ground that laid out pretty square and stuff, draw me what would be your ideal way of setting it up." And I did that a couple years ago, and I need to maybe revisit it, but I still think that's how I would do that. So basically, let me give you a little backstory there. On the place that I live, I had about 39 paddocks on this place, and I started to see some things that I wasn't liking very well. Um, so I've now reduced it to 8 paddocks, similar to this. Now, our place is not square, but what I mean by that is that the paddocks that I left behind they're bigger and they're longer and more rectangular, and it allows me to use portable fence, which is what you know, I used to do, to make adjust the paddock size and everything depending on the growth, and then also allow for easier things such as, even though we don't really brush hog, if I wanted to do that, or we're not spreading fertilizer either, but if a person wanted to do that, it's easier. My wife likes to ride horses. It's easier for that. We do some prescribed fire. It's easier for that. So, um, you know, it just adds for a lot more flexibility. And that's what I was trying to get at with breaking this up in the manner that I did for my friend, is that the amount of flexibility and stuff that it would offer. So, um, I just think that deal with, I don't know, the smaller the pieces I broke it into with more permanent fencing, I just was seeing poor grazing patterns. Actually, utilization wasn't it the way I wanted it to be, and so I'm kind of going back to what I used to do. And part of that was I was working a full-time job, and I didn't have time to put up fence every day. I had time to go out to open a gate, and so that's why I built those permanent paddocks. But now that I'm not doing that and haven't done that for quite a while, I'm adjusting back again to what I was doing. And I ended up spending about as much time you know, keeping the fences hot, trying to keep them hot and keep the vegetation out of them and stuff as I did if I would just been building fence,
Yeah.
temporary fence. So
Yes.
give and take with all of it.
Yep, for sure. So okay, I know that you graze several ewes out on some winter annuals on some crop ground. Tell us about that, what you're doing on your perimeter fence there. It's because it sounds like it's pretty temporary.
Yeah. And we've changed that too. Like I say, this thing's constantly evolving and going back and whatnot. But we were doing just using 1 inch fiberglass post, 4 foot post, and we were putting up 3 strands of 14 gauge, either soft wire or high tensile, but 14 gauge either way. And we would just we would go and build it and have to take it down, at the end of the grazing season. So we'd usually get out there sometime in late October, maybe on a bad year it might be the 1st of December or something like that. But and then we'd graze anywhere from the middle of March until the 1st of May. But there at the end, now this year we didn't go to cover crops. They didn't get very much of it planted in a timely manner, and it wasn't worth going to. And we had grass, so we just stayed on fescue with the ewes. But last year I started using some of the 3/8 inch, the white post. They're super cheap. I don't even remember what I gave for them, $1.40 or 60 or something like that, with the little spring clips and stuff. And I could carry a couple hundred of those and just drive around those fields and push those in and still use the 14 gauge wire, but put those things on, like, I'm trying to remember what the spacing was on those, but I think it was like 40 or 45 feet or something. But still, I was putting in quite a few posts, but it was no big deal. I could just push them in that soft ground and stuff. And also we went from doing 3 wires to 2 wires. What we found was that as long as they had plenty of rye or cover crops to eat, they just weren't giving us any trouble whatsoever. So why put up the third wire? It's just one more wire that we were going to have to take down. So,
Mhm.
and then the picture that we started with actually was is my brother-in-law's father, and he built us that wire winder. So it's gas powered, and we can wind up a mile of fence, 1 strand, in just like a few minutes. It's amazing.
One question that just popped up: do you have any issues with deer on that two strand of fence around the crop ground?
Occasionally they'll knock the top wire down or something like that, but um, it's never caused us any issue with the sheep getting out.
Sure. Yep. Yep. So as far as your regular, perennial pastures, are you using mostly polywire to subdivide them?
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm doing on that, like on the ones at home. Now, on some of the rental ground that we have picked up recently, honestly, it's not, there's like, I'm not subdividing at all. They're 30-acre pastures and they're getting put in there for a week at a time. And we're just doing the best we can with it because of the limitations, and stuff. So, um, part of that's due to, I know a bunch of people chimed in there about water and being the limiting factor, and that's our big deal on a lot of rental ground. The water development's pretty poor. There's different reasons why we, as of yet, haven't developed the water or will not be able to. Every situation is different, but we're just trying to do the best we can with it. So, um, utilizing the ponds or creeks when they're running, or utilizing the well water that is there. But anyhow, that's but on the ones here at home, yeah, we're using polywire to break those into smaller paddocks.
Sure. Sure. And what are you finding the most effective way to run your polywire? Do you have any way you're doing it all, like running your wire and putting your post in on one pass, or are you coming back and just what's some good tricks that you could share that kind of makes that a little bit quicker?
Well, I'm a little probably antiquated there. I usually just drive a four-wheeler. I'm still driving a four-wheeler. I like a four-wheeler for maneuverability more so than a side-by-side personally. That's just a personal deal. But I usually just reel one reel out and go get the second reel, and then I just put the post in as I'm going on both wires. I clip them at both at the same time, just hook them and push the post in the ground or step it in, depending on what I'm using. So that's just the way I do it. Cattle are easy, obviously, just one wire on them, and I do that a lot of times. It depends. Sometimes I do that as I go with the post as I go, and sometimes I'll even just walk that out if it's not a super long stretch or something like that, and carry a dozen or 20 posts in my arm and just walk it out as I go. So
Did you ever mess with the polyelectric netting at any time?
I did one time years ago when we first got the sheep. I think it was in 2012 when we had such the bad drought that they were kind of giving me fits about, that the fence was hot, but they weren't getting shocked and stuff much. And so I bought some of the netting just to kind of as a visual deal and use that. For me personally, it's just too much labor and stuff for it just doesn't work on our situation, but I'm sure it's got its place.
Sure. And this is maybe just a tick off topic, but I'll wrap it back into it. Are you ever running your cattle and sheep in the same area to where you're having to do a little bit more with your cross fencing or your polywire?
No, usually I mean, we've done that in the past, but usually the sheep are, in the case of like when we're grazing the custom grazing cows, is in the same unit, we'll say, as the sheep. The sheep we go in first, and then the cows will come in later.
So one thing I want to touch base on very briefly is the virtual fencing options. So
Hmm.
I guess as a teaser, because our fourth webinar and our conference will be highlighting specifically virtual fence. So we're going to talk so much about virtual fence coming up here this summer. I don't want to dive in it too much, other than uh, the more and more I hear about it, and you said it too, it's just there's just so many opportunities it can add to a grazing system or a cropping system, and it's only going to keep getting better and more cost effective. So just keep your eye on it is all I've got to say for now, really, and keep studying up on it, and I think it can fit about any operation. So it's
Yeah.
just a lot of exciting stuff, in my opinion. I can't wait to eventually get it.
My biggest hang up with it is right now the cost is kind of you can make that work for the cows, but when the sheep collar is cost the same as the cows, that's the problem. I wish that they could get that cost down for the sheep,
Yeah.
and we'd be all over it. But
Yeah, and that's honestly we had me and another guy had a conversation just the other day about the sheep and another thing about the collars for the sheep are almost as much as the ewe. So, you
yeah,
right there, you almost have you're buying two using one just for the collar.
right,
And so, anyway,
right.
on the sheep thing specifically, I think there's a lot farther way to go to get it to where you can really justify it than some of the cow companies. But either way, it'll get there. And when it does, I know I'll be all over it on the sheep as well.
Yeah.
So water systems, this seems to be maybe one of the things everyone's kind of wanting to hear and learn more about. We've hit on it a little bit, but there's so many directions we can go with this. So kind of highlight maybe a little bit more in depth what you have found that works really well for you. I know the HDPE pipe is changing. I mean, we keep growing and building on it. It's doing a lot for us. But that's just one tool when it comes to water. So dive into that a little bit, Jeremiah.
Well, probably like a lot of people, or hopefully like a lot of people, we've used a lot of over the ground poly pipe while we're setting our system up and making sure that that's kind of where it's going to work, because the worst thing I see sometimes is people invest in a water system and put it in the ground, and then it doesn't work right. I mean, it's not that the water doesn't work right, but the animals don't graze the system properly or whatever. And so um, I would encourage that if somebody's thinking about adding some water is to still, even if you're going to bury it, to use some over the ground pipe and see if that's works the way you want it to.
And I
But
should I should maybe stop you real quick if and let folks know what we're talking about because everyone may not be aware. So the HDPE pipe is a really durable black plastic or poly type pipe, and you can lay it right on the ground. I've ran it over several times in some areas, and it doesn't collapse right away. I mean, it will eventually if you do it a bunch, but real durable. And if need be, you can roll it back up. You can drag it.
Hmm.
It comes in predominantly 500-foot sections, so I mean you can easily put 500 a watering point every 500 feet. And so anyway, it's just a really good affordable tool. You can get it on Powerflex provides it, and then most hardware stores you can find it as well. I buy mine at a local hardware store and works just great.
Yeah.
Um, and anyway, yeah, and Jeff just asked, can you use it on top of the ground in the fall and the winter? So how do you manage that HDPE pipe through winter months?
You, we usually don't. I mean, most of the time we drain that unless we're using something like a freeze miser or something like that that we can have, where it's going to daylight or whatever. But even if you do that, I don't know. There's limitations, I think, on how much length they want to use with the freeze miser. The company can tell you how much that is, but no, usually in the wintertime, we're going to something, either it's a pond or a spring or a creek or live water of some sort, or quote unquote freeze proof tanks. I don't really believe there's such a thing, honestly, but
Yeah,
you do
you're right.
what you
Yes.
can, right? So, um, and by then, a lot of the way that we're grazing is when the forage is more dormant and stuff, we're grazing away from the water point, so it's not as big a deal to use like a more permanent tank, or something like that. So,
Yep, for sure. And that's how we've kind of are setting up some of our stuff. We've got one centralized water, whether it's a hydrant in a tank or a pond or a ball water of some form. And then we're kind of building off of that using this HDPE pipe and using
hmm.
it as long as it's not frozen, from April to November or October. And two, a lot of times we're trying to run ours down our fence lines, so
Yeah,
we keep it from getting walked on or ran over.
yeah,
And if it's something that you leave for a year or two, a lot of that vegetation is going to grow over it, and it's
yeah,
going to protect that black pipe from the sun, and it's going to give you a little bit of forgiveness in colder temperatures as well. So it's going to keep your water cooler in the summer and a little, I mean, it's not going to, it's still going to freeze at 20 degrees, but if you got some days that are 40 or so and it gets down in the low 30s at night or high 20s, you
yeah,
have some forgiveness there.
yeah. In the HDPE, I haven't bought any for a while, but the stuff we were using, make sure if somebody buys some, it's not like the 100 psi. It's like 240 or something, isn't it? I
It's
think.
it's quite a it's not a flexible pipe. It's
Right.
very rigid.
Most of ours now, like on my home place here, is we have well water and it's piped in like 2-inch PVC glued joints, and stuff. It's buried, and then we have risers come out with plastic quick coupler valves, and so that's how we use it during most of the summer or most of the year, I guess I'd say.
Yeah.
Um, but let's see what else. And then,
What
like I said,
size
go
what's
ahead.
here's another question. What size of HDPE are you using for this?
So we bought ours a long time ago, and it's almost all inch. I'd probably get bigger than that because it limits you on your delivery depending on how big your pressure tank is and stuff like that, and how many animals you're watering and stuff. And so I don't know what all the sizes are they make it in, but what do you use? I mean, are you
I
using
use
anything
an
now?
inch. I
Inch.
use an inch
Okay.
across the board.
Okay.
Most of our water is coming from rural water meters, so pressure is generally not much of an issue.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I've done well with an inch. And like say, this is something we're newly putting in. We've not gotten too deep into it.
Hmm.
Um, like we've got pretty big plans in the next 2 to 3 years to have really expand our waters. But I think we'll probably stick with an inch unless we start seeing some issues somewhere.
Yeah.
Uh, and one other thing I want to note here is the Plasson water couplers that you mentioned.
Hmm.
Again, if you're not familiar with that, it's just a male and a female end that hooks together, similar to an air hose, kind of.
Hmm.
And I think for the male and female end, it's like 25 or $30. Obviously the female end's a little bit expensive than the male end,
Yeah. Yeah.
but when you look at that compared to like $130 water hydrant,
Yeah.
I mean, you're saving like $100 per watering point. You know, if you had a water hydrant every 500 feet, that would add up pretty quick. So that's one thing you can check out for sure.
And they've lasted. We've had them
Yeah.
forever, and
Hmm.
we've had very few of them fail. Whereas when you have a hydrant, you're always digging it up sooner or later. The metal, the corrosion and stuff, just it happens, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah. I had the same experience with mine. Very few failures, if any, actually.
yeah.
So another question here was tips for using, additional tips for that HDPE pipe above ground. How are you connecting yours, Jeremiah, to, the ends?
So that's been a little bit of a deal. I was getting oh goodness, what is it called now? They were fittings that they would actually cut a thread in on it. They weren't compression fitting. I think they
Yeah.
were Hanson's or something like that. I believe they were made in New Zealand. And I was getting them. The last place I knew you could get them was in Canada out of Cottage Water Systems. Well, that's not in business anymore. And I've contacted the people in New Zealand, the company, and then I never could get them to respond. But those I really like because they have a nut on each end, and whether it's a coupler, whether it's a T valve, or just an L or a straight in that you could screw something into, like those Plassen
Mhm.
valves. They actually cut a thread into the HDPE, so it wasn't like the pressure was going to blow it off.
Yeah.
Do you know that? Can you still find those, or do you?
I've never not seen what you're talking about.
Okay,
Uh, I just use a simple barb and hose clamp.
okay,
I've not had any failures with those.
okay.
Because the PowerFlex has like compression fittings for that, but it barely doesn't fit the hardware HDE pipe. Like that pipe is just a different wall diameter, I guess, to where
Mhm.
it'll blow apart. So if you go on there and think this is a cool deal, make sure you get, and I even think it does say on their website that they don't fit all pipe,
Yeah.
all HDE pipe. So, but that's another way I've seen too.
When I worked at Lincoln University, we buried a bunch of HDPE pipe that was like 2 inch, I believe, and we used the compression fittings, and I don't remember the brand name, doesn't matter, but I can tell you that we dug up a gob of them, and I was really frustrated that well, we paid for them and they kept blowing apart, and
Yeah, they're not cheap.
yeah, so I don't know, we had pressure reducers and everything on the line, but it anyhow, something to keep in mind.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. When adding more waters to your operation, do you need to consider well capacity or depth?
I don't think so unless you are adding more animals. You know what I mean? Like if you're to have one water and you're just moving to a different water, it shouldn't really matter.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, but all of a sudden you're going to double your herd, then maybe so
Yeah,
be a
then maybe so.
consideration.
And that's why you need to you can do that, but if you can also just vary the size of your tank so you have more volume, if your delivery is slower. If you have adequate delivery, and it can recharge faster, it's not as big a deal. If you don't, well, then you need a bigger tank so that you can have more volume, while it does recharge.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with your water, your refill rate, based
Yeah,
on how big a tank you need. Has a lot.
exactly.
When you're establishing your water system, it's kind of hard to say that you can really have too much water. You want it as adaptable as it can be or portable, but also it's good if you're going to put in water infrastructure to almost have too much as far as volume or holding capacity, just because if you ever have the opportunity to size up your herd or flock, you don't want to be in a bind thinking I don't have enough water flow to add additional animals to the farm. So kind of think more is better, bigger is better, and that really takes a lot of those restrictions away of what you can do on your farm. Pretty slick idea. I've seen this before. More or less has a Job float and a valve there in the bottom, and it's just a propane tank cut in half. And I think you've got steel wheels all the way around on that. Is that right?
Yeah, it's steel wheels. There's one on each side on the back, and then there's one on the front, like a caster type wheel, and you can
Mhm.
pull it with a four wheeler, and you can empty that tank. We've got a 3 inch plug in the bottom of it. You can unscrew, and you can empty that tank in just no time at all, and be moving. And it's it's not perfect, but it works pretty good, and we like it, like you said, on those bigger bunches of cows. If you got 170 or 200 cows in a bunch, they don't. They all seem like they want to drink at the same time for whatever reason. And so this has enough volume that it can kind of keep up with them pretty well. And of course, they're not coming from miles away where they're all going to be there at the same time. In those paddocks, they could drift in and out, but they're still going to come in several at a time. So,
So one of our new and continual growing programs and projects that we're working with, and Judy's kind of the ramrod here of this, is our resource hub. So you can go on our resource hub, and Judy's got several blogs and farmer interviews and testimonials on here. We have many more of those how-to videos, and actually here at the end of the month going to do a whole nother video shoot with many more videos. So be on the lookout for those later in the year. These webinars are a part of this program as well. And this is all possible through our partners, the Illinois Forage and Grassland Council, U of I, and then the NRCS. So we're happy to have those on board, folks on board with us to be partners on these projects. And so back to the hub, real quick. What's so good about that, and what our vision is to for producers of any experience type to be able to go on there, search questions, and find relative and informational resources on there to answer questions and to help you through your forage management process, whether that's hay, grazing, soils, or various types of livestock. So, and for some reason, if there's no articles on there to answer questions, we have a really big, easy to find Ask Us a Question tab. So if you hit that tab, it'll send you to a little questionnaire, and we get those emails directly to Judy and I. And so far, we've been able to answer many of those questions or emails within 24 to 48 hours. A lot of times, we'll reply with a brief email and then set up a phone call shortly thereafter. So, like I say, we're not hanging you out to dry by any means, and taking weeks or months to reply. So, this, like I say, this is something that will continue to build and grow, and we're very pleased with how it's working out.